This is Chapters from Out of the Best Books, where we hope to offer up new insights for the curious believer in the gospel of Jesus Christ by selecting a chapter from one of our great books out of the Deseret Book Library. I'm Sarah Collins, and I feel like this topic is very timely as we're looking forward to General Conference and maybe some questions we might have. And I think at one point we have all probably asked ourselves, why do we have prophets? Why should we listen to them? In the Restored Gospel, we believe that the counsel we receive from prophets prepares us for the future and all that lies ahead. The revelation they receive is for us today. Revelation that takes into account the unique circumstances that we're going through in the world right now. In short, as author Sheri Dew writes, prophets see around corners, which is what she shares from her own experience working closely with prophets in her book that's titled such, Prophets See Around Corners. And she shares common questions about prophets and affirms the myriad ways they point us to Jesus Christ. So here's chapter 6, called Why Follow Prophets, which is one of those questions many of us probably have. And this chapter helps us gain some confidence in why we are following modern day prophets.
On September 29, 1978, Russell M. Nelson, then the Sunday School General President, attended a meeting with general authorities and regional representatives. In that meeting, President Spencer W. Kimball delivered a stirring address entitled, To the Uttermost Parts of the Earth. One part of President Kimball's message in particular inspired Russell Nelson. And what of China, asked President Kimball? The third largest country in the world. Nearly 1 billion of our Father's children live in China, 1/4 of the entire world's population. 660 million of them speak Mandarin Chinese. How many of us speak Mandarin Chinese? We must prepare while there is time to prepare to teach these people. That evening, Russell Nelson told his wife, Dancel, about President Kimball's inspiring message. I didn't hear President Kimball invite everyone except Brother Nelson to learn Mandarin, he said. Will you learn Mandarin with me? Dancel readily agreed. They hired tutors, and their study of Mandarin began. It was just a few months later that Dr. Nelson attended the annual conference of the American Association of Thoracic Surgery in Boston. When he prayed before he left his hotel room, he included praying for the people of China, as President Kimball had counseled in his message to regional representatives. Once at the seminar, Dr. Nelson took a seat on the front row as he typically did. But during one presentation, he felt unusually restless. When the lights went off to accommodate slides, he slipped to the back of the room. After standing for a while, he found a seat near the back for the remainder of the meeting. When the lights came back on at the meeting's end, he found himself sitting next to a distinguished surgeon from China, Dr. Wu Ying Kai, head of the Fuwai Hospital in Beijing. Dr. Wu spoke fluent English but was impressed with Dr. Nelson's earnest, though fledgling attempts to speak Mandarin. Thus commenced Dr. Nelson's long association with Dr. Wu and other Chinese surgeons. Learning Mandarin opened the door for repeated trips to China, where Dr. Nelson mentored Chinese surgeons in the burgeoning field of open-heart surgery. In fact, the last open-heart operation Dr. Nelson performed occurred after his call to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, when his Chinese colleagues prevailed upon him to perform a life-saving operation on one of China's most famous opera stars. Because Russell M. Nelson acted upon a prophet's counsel, the trajectory of his life literally changed and blossomed through the treasured associations he made in China. Some years later, long after he had been called to the Quorum of the 12, he was even designated an old friend of China, honored by medical colleagues there, and welcomed into meetings with government officials. The pattern Dr. Nelson followed is available to each of us. As we listen to and follow the counsel of prophets, the trajectory of each of our lives will change. Brigham Young described this very experience. Prior to meeting the prophet Joseph Smith, he had been searching for light and knowledge. When I saw Joseph Smith, Brigham Young explained, he took heaven, figuratively speaking, and brought it down to earth. And he took the earth, brought it up and opened up in plainness and simplicity the things of God. And that is the beauty of his mission. That is what prophets do. They lift our sights above this telestial world. When President Nelson introduced the principles of ministering and a home-centered, church-supported curriculum, he said it was time to study the gospel in higher, holier ways. When he counseled us to rid our lives of contention, he invited us to live a higher, holier law. In these kinds of admonitions, President Nelson followed the pattern of his predecessors through the ages. Prophets always invite us to live in higher, holier ways. They invite us to look to the future with optimism, as President Thomas S. Monson did when he promised us that the future is as bright as your faith. They invite us to rise above this telestial world and get better and better at being disciples of Jesus Christ. In this quest, the words of prophets always help us lift our sights higher. President Henry B. Eyring taught that the Savior has always been the protector of those who would accept his protection. When we reject the counsel which comes from God, we do not choose to be independent from outside influence. We choose another influence. The choice not to take prophetic counsel changes the very ground upon which we stand. It becomes more dangerous. The best time to have decided to help Noah build the ark was the first time he asked. The gift of prophets is the gift of receiving prophetic counsel. In his first General Conference address as President of the Church, President Russell M. Nelson openly acknowledged the revelation he was receiving. One of the things the Spirit has repeatedly impressed upon my mind since my new calling as President of the Church is how willing the Lord is to reveal his mind and will. President Nelson's statement is not unlike Joseph Smith's declaration that it is my meditation all the day and more than my meat and drink to know how I shall make the saints of God to comprehend the visions that roll like an overflowing surge before my mind. President George Q. Cannon, who served as a counselor to 4 presidents of the church, taught that this church from the day of its organization up to the present time has never been 1 hour, yea, I may say 1 moment without revelation, without having a man in our midst who can tell us as a people the mind and the will of God, who can point out to us that which we should do, who can point out to us that which is false and incorrect. This has been the case always. Elder Quentin L. Cook verified that the same pattern exists today. Those of us currently serving in the quorum of the 12 apostles have been blessed in our day as significant revelations have come through recent prophets, he said. President Russell M. Nelson has been a commissioned agent of the Lord, especially with respect to revelations to help families build sanctuaries of faith in their homes, gather scattered Israel on both sides of the veil, and bless endowed members in sacred temple ordinance matters. When important changes to bless our homes were announced at the October 2018 General Conference, I testified that in the deliberations of the Council of the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 Apostles in the Temple, after our beloved prophet petitioned the Lord for revelation, a powerful confirmation was received by all. Why should we listen to and follow prophets? Because prophets receive revelation for us today. Revelation that contemplates the unique circumstances in the world now. Their counsel is unencumbered by the opinions, philosophies, and personal biases of even the smartest, brightest, and most accomplished experts. Their words help guide us through the mists of darkness Lehi and Nephi saw and help us hold tightly to the rod of iron. Sometimes their words are meant for a global audience, and at other times their counsel is for a specific individual. When I was called to serve as the second counselor in the Relief Society General Presidency, I was the first female general officer in decades to be unmarried, and thus in need of continuing my employment while I served. Other unmarried women have since been called, but at the time, my call was an anomaly. As I began my service, it quickly became apparent that there were things I was asked not to do as a general officer, such as endorse or promote products and authors, that I was required to do in my job as the Executive Vice President of Publishing at Deseret Book. In that capacity, I worked constantly with authors, musicians, and artists in developing products for the commercial market. The very nature of my employment was in direct conflict with my new church assignment. Not knowing what to do, I sought an appointment with then Elder Dallin H. Oaks, who chaired the Priesthood Executive Council that had responsibility for the organizations of the church. When I explained my dilemma, he said, "Sheri, do you understand the principle of wearing two hats?" I did not, and so he proceeded to teach me how to wear more than one hat and to do so even when the purposes of the two hats collide. As he taught me that day, I had the most interesting experience. Elder Oaks's counsel was eye-opening, and I hung on his every word. But I also heard more than what he said. The Spirit amplified his words in one of the more unforgettable teaching moments I have ever had. As he spoke, I could literally visualize specific things I should and should not do. I left Elder Oaks's office knowing I had received more than wise counsel. I had been tutored by an apostle in a way that opened the heavens for me. As I walked back to my office, I remembered an interview I had done with Elder Henry B. Eyring when I was working on President Hinckley's biography. Elder Eyring had told me about the impact President Hinckley had on him when they met one-on-one. "When I'm with him, I'm wiser. It is because he brings down the power of heaven into my life," he said. He then added, "I don't think I have ever walked away from an encounter with President Hinckley where I've not known that I was in the presence of a man whom God directed." Elder Eyring's experience with President Hinckley perfectly describes how I felt the day Elder Oaks tutored me. During the years since that experience, I have been asked to wear more than one hat many times, with those hats often being in conflict. But the principle I learned from Elder Oaks has repeatedly served me well. That treasured teaching moment literally changed the circumstances and perhaps even the trajectory of my life. The question for us today is the same question the children of men have faced whenever prophets have been on the earth. Will we heed their words? Remember when the Lord warned Nephi to take all who would go with him and flee into the wilderness? Nephi recorded that all those who would go with me were those who believed in the warnings and the revelations of God, wherefore they did hearken unto my words. Of the 8 billion people on the earth today, the Lord has entrusted just 15 men with his restored priesthood keys. Wouldn't we want to listen to them first? And wouldn't we want to listen to them most? Simply put, will we go with the prophet today, meaning the living prophets? Will we hear their words and act upon them? When President Russell M. Nelson pleads with us to increase our spiritual capacity to receive revelation, will we go to work on that challenge? When he asks us to spend more time in the temple, reduce contention and become peacemakers, overcome the world, help gather Israel, and let God prevail in our lives, will we make those requests our priorities? Will we stand by the Lord's servant Joseph Smith, the prophet of the restoration who presides over this dispensation? And will we stand by the Lord's living prophet? Doing so gives us access to the spiritual blessings of the church. These blessings are not magic. They won't prevent heartache or dry our tears or prevent us from feeling disappointment. They don't promise that we will never feel alone. They certainly don't allow us to escape the test of mortality and the trials that come with it. But the spiritual blessings made possible by the restoration of the Melchizedek priesthood help us take the tests of mortality and triumph over our trials because they give us access to extraordinary divine help in the process. Brigham Young once said that the secret feeling of my heart was that I would be willing to crawl around the earth on my hands and knees to see such a man as was Peter, Jeremiah, Moses, or any man that could tell me anything about God and heaven. I feel the same. If we want to feel the measure of our creation, if we care about doing what we came to this earth to do, prophets are a vital key. Their words will help us find our individual missions and then fulfill them. Not long ago, I accompanied my boss to a meeting with the First Presidency, where we sought counsel on a complex issue affecting one of the church's commercial media companies for which we have responsibility. What then unfolded was amazing to witness. As these three presiding high priests counseled with one another, it was clear that at the outset they each saw this sensitive issue differently. But as they deliberated among themselves in an attitude of candor, but generosity toward each other, the Spirit flooded the room. And before we might have expected it, they were of one mind and one heart. The way they counseled together was inspiring, as was the way they then counseled us. As we walked out of the room, my boss and I said to each other, almost in unison, "We just witnessed the First Presidency receiving revelation together." I can only imagine how many thousands of times that exact scene has played out over the decades, where prophets, seers, and revelators have counseled together, relying on a rare combination of wisdom and revelation, magnified by the priesthood keys they hold. I left that meeting that day with an enhanced feeling of gratitude for being led by inspired leaders who seek heaven's help constantly and want only to do what the Lord would have them do. What a gift are prophets of God. In the summer of 2022, President Dallin H. Oaks delivered the keynote address at a religious liberty summit hosted in Rome by the University of Notre Dame. The summit was filled with men and women of goodwill representing many faiths, and the messages at the summit were insightful, informative, and important. I learned from every one of them. But when President Oaks rose to speak, I experienced something distinctively, qualitatively different. The beautiful witness of the Spirit that reaffirmed, "Sheri, you are now hearing a prophet." How blessed we are to know that prophets walk the earth, to know who they are, and to have frequent opportunities to hear their words. For by the Spirit are all things made known unto the prophets. Following prophets will be the smartest thing we ever do, because prophets will be the last safe voices on earth. No leaders care about us and our future the way they do. No other leaders are more honest with us than they are. No other leaders come to us entirely devoid of a personal agenda. There are simply no other leaders like them in all the world. Prophets receive revelation from the Lord for our day, our challenges, our dilemmas, our circumstances. I know this is true. I declare that it is true. I am an eyewitness to it. Following the Lord's prophets makes us smarter, because seers see things we cannot yet see. Prophets help us see around corners. You can know this too. If you will seek with real intent, having faith in Christ, you will come to know for yourself that the Lord's prophets lead us today. And that knowledge will literally change your life.
I love to hear Sheri Dew's beautiful declaration of prophets receiving revelation from the Lord for our day, our challenges, our dilemmas, and our circumstances. I think that's the beautiful message of the restored gospel, and it's such an exciting witness to be a part of. If you'd like to hear the rest of this book, you can listen to it now by downloading Deseret Bookshelf Plus and searching Prophets See Around Corners by Sheri Dew. You can also find it at your local Deseret bookstore or online at deseretbook.com. We'll see you next time on Out of the Best Books.